Hey guys! Tonight, we're pulling back the draped linen curtains of a drafty medieval cottage, or maybe a damp stone chamber above a great hall, to slip into the quiet, candlelit world of a woman in the Middle Ages. It's dark, not just nighttime dark, but deep, ink-stained dark, with only the flicker of a rushlight or a distant hearth to remind you that fire hasn't given up on this world. The air smells like old straw and yesterday's stew. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows, although the sun hasn't yet committed to rising. You stir under coarse wool, one hand pressed against your chest to check. Yes, you're still here. You're a woman in the 12th century, or maybe the 14th. Doesn't really matter. If you're not a queen, you're probably not. You're someone who sleeps beside livestock, or near servants, or on a lumpy pallet with your sisters. And like most women of your time, you will live and die within 5 miles of where you were born. You probably won't survive this life. Not all of it. The odds are stacked against you, honestly, between disease, childbirth, and whatever your neighbors might accuse you of later. But that's okay. You're going to live it anyway, day by day, sun by sun, and prayer by whispered prayer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you've got a moment, tell me your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up cold, not just chilly, but bone cold. It's the kind of cold that settles into the thatched roof overnight and greets you in the marrow. There's no central heating, not even a fireplace if you're poor. Just a heavy dog curled near your feet, and perhaps the body heat of your sisters or mother beside you. You learn young that layering is survival. Linen shift, then a woolen kirtle, then anything else you can find that doesn't stink too badly. Your fingers, already rough at 10 years old, reach for your coif or scarf, because uncovered heads are for fools and sinners. Outside, the frost glitters like spilled sugar on the barley fields. Smoke rises in thin columns from other cottages, but your family's hearth hasn't been lit yet. That's your job, or your mother's, or someone's who isn't too sick to do it. The floor is dirt, always has been. Occasionally, you throw rushes down to absorb the filth, and if you're lucky, someone remembered to toss rosemary or lavender in the mix last time to cover the smell of slop buckets and stale sweat. And yes, those buckets are exactly what you think they are. You hear the clink of iron. Your father, or your mother's husband, or your lord steward is already up, feeding the animals or inspecting tools. If you're on a manor, someone else handles the oxen. If you're not, congratulations. That's your job now. Your day will begin with prayer, whether it's mumbled or muttered, or marked with a sign of the cross. Religion isn't a choice. It's baked into the walls, the mealtime chants, the pace of the seasons. Even your calendar revolves around the saints. And most of the stories they tell in church involve some woman being miraculously pure or tragically martyred. And you, stretching your sore arms, are neither miraculous nor tragic, just cold, sore, and already behind on chores. You trudge to the hearth, fingers numb, and check the ashes. If you're lucky, there's still a glowing coal to coax into flame. If not, you'll walk to a neighbor's with a lantern and ask to borrow fire. This is your world. Dirt, smoke, bread, and borrowed fire. Mainstream fact: most people in the Middle Ages lived in small rural communities tied to a local manor. The vast majority of women were peasant farmers or domestic workers, and their lives were governed by the seasons, their family roles, and feudal obligations. But don't think it's all gloom. There's laughter here too. Somewhere, a baby is fussing, and someone farts, and your older brother pretends not to notice while poking the fire with a stick. And when the bread is ready, the scent of rye or oat fills the hut and reminds you that comfort still exists, even if it's coarse and chewy. Now, let's say you weren't born in a dirt floor cottage. Maybe you've got stone under your feet and servants to make the fire for you. Still, you don't wake up warm. Castles are freezing. They're not romantic fairy tale places. They're windy, echoey, smoke-filled boxes made of limestone and politics. The tapestries on the wall aren't just decoration. They're insulation. You might share your chamber with a nursemaid, a cousin, a lady-in-waiting, or your mother's disappointment. You rise, someone brushes your hair. You step into slippers so thin they might as well be socks. A maid holds out your dress, a gown you didn't choose, in a color that flatters your father's ambitions. Your hands are rubbed with rosemary water, your breath checked for sweetness, and then you're ushered down the corridor to breakfast and duty. Quirky detail. Some noblewomen in the 14th century used live leeches for skincare, placed around the jawline to reduce puffiness before a feast. No one ever said beauty came cheap. Either way, you're being watched. If you're poor, by your mother and the village priest. If you're noble, by your chaperone and the household steward. Your body isn't just yours. It's an asset, a liability, a future dowry, and someone's potential heir incubator. Even your walk is policed. Too confident and you're vain. Too shy and you're suspicious. Around mid-morning, the town bells ring. Not to wake you, they're not alarm clocks, but to mark mass, market, or the passing of someone who didn't make it through the night. You glance at your siblings, still alive. For now, your chores begin. Always chores. They change with the seasons, but never with your mood. In spring, plucking feathers, spinning wool, helping sow the fields if your parents are desperate. In summer, gathering herbs, cooking in sweat, shooing flies. In fall, crushing apples for cider, preserving turnips, patching roofs with whatever hasn't rotted. Winter, don't freeze, don't die. Try to keep the fire going and the spirits up. Debate line. Historians still argue whether medieval women had agency in the way we understand it, or whether survival itself was their form of resistance. But you do get moments. You laugh with other girls by the well. You whisper secrets into each other's veils. You steal a plum and share it. You sing while you sew. And you dream, because dreaming hasn't been outlawed yet. Once in a while, A traveling merchant or minstrel passes through. You hear tales of cities with paved roads, of queens who ruled empires, of saints who floated when they prayed. You wonder if they floated because they were holy, or just because they finally had time to sleep. At night, you return to your place, your corner of straw or curtained alcove. You rub your feet. You whisper a prayer. You listen to your mother snoring, or your cousin crying, or the dog scratching its fleas. Somewhere, an owl hoots, and if you're very lucky in the medieval sense, meaning you didn't starve, get accused of witchcraft, or get sent to a convent for being too mouthy, you close your eyes and drift off. Tomorrow, it all begins again. You're small, not yet a girl, not yet a worker, not yet a bride, just a tightly swaddled bundle with a damp nose and a medieval future. You don't get to decide much, not when you'll crawl, not when you'll walk, not even when you'll be baptized, because that happens almost immediately, often within hours of being born. No pressure, right? And let's be honest, your odds aren't great. Up to half of all babies in the Middle Ages don't make it past their 5th birthday. So the church says, better get that soul to God, just in case. They dunk you, sprinkle you, or pour water over your tiny head in a chilly chapel while your godparents pray and your mother rests or buries another child. Still, here you are, alive, for now. Your world is shaped by sounds. The creak of the door, the rumble of cartwheels, the rhythm of the paternoster as it echoes off stone walls. You learn your first lessons long before letters. Don't cry too loudly, or you'll wake father. Don't touch the fire. Always cross yourself when passing the chapel. And never, ever interrupt the priest. If you're poor, your cradle might be a basket lined with wool and scraps. If you're noble, it's a carved wooden crib with symbolic animals, lions for strength, lambs for obedience. Either way, you're wrapped tight like a sausage in linen bands to straighten your limbs. Swaddling is serious business. Crooked legs suggest a crooked soul. Your mother talks to you while she spins flax. Your older sister sneaks you slivers of cheese when no one's looking. And your grandmother, if you're lucky enough to have one, mutters prayers and old wives' tales about changelings and saints. You're told that if you sleep with a clove of garlic and a pinch of salt under your pillow, no fairy will steal you. At least, not tonight. By the time you're 3, your world has doubled in size. From the cradle to the hearth, from your mother's lap to the muddy yard where chickens peck and siblings bicker. You learn to avoid angry geese. You learn to copy your mother's gestures, how to knead dough, how to shush a baby, how to hide your feelings when someone calls you a handful. Mainstream fact. Children in the Middle Ages were not coddled for long. By the age of 7, they were expected to take on real responsibilities, from tending animals to assisting in crafts, and were treated as small adults in many ways. There's no such thing as childhood as we think of it today. No pastel toys, no picture books, no school unless you're extremely lucky or destined for a nunnery. Instead, you're shaped by repetition, observation, and obedience. Your first education is oral, Psalms recited at dawn, stories shared by firelight, warnings whispered during thunderstorms. You memorize prayers before you understand them. You repeat what the priest says, even if the Latin sounds like another language, because it is. But God understands, and that's what matters. If you're noble, you might have a tutor, or at least a governess. By the time you can hold a slate, she teaches you your letters, the Psalms, maybe a bit of French or Latin, if your family's ambitions stretch that far. You practice writing on wax tablets with a stylus. Your hands are small, but you already know how to fold them properly. When you pray, if you're a peasant, education is much more practical. You learn to milk goats. You memorize which herbs help with fever and which ones cause vomiting. You learn to gut a fish before you can spell your name. And above all, you learn how to disappear when your father is drunk or your mother is weeping over another lost harvest. Quirky detail. Some medieval parents believed that tickling babies too much would make them grow up frivolous and immoral. So if you're giggling too loud, someone might swat your feet and warn you about moral softness. By age 5, you're already learning your place in the world. If you're a girl, that means quiet hands, bowed head, and downcast eyes. The Virgin Mary is your gold standard, silent, obedient, pure. You're not quite sure what pure means yet, but everyone seems to want you to be it. Sometimes you sneak away and climb a tree or splash in the river, and for a moment it feels like freedom. Then your cousin calls for you, or a bell rings, or someone reminds you that good girls don't climb trees. You're introduced to tools early: a spindle, a distaff, maybe a wooden bowl, and a long-handled spoon. These are your inheritance. No dowry yet, but you will stir, sow, and scrub your way into womanhood. And then come the commandments. Not just the 10 commandments, but the unspoken ones, the village laws, the whispered truths, passed from mother to daughter. You know them by heart. Don't talk back to father. Don't go into the woods alone. Don't wear your veil too loosely. Don't sing in front of strangers. Don't laugh too loud near the boys. Some girls rebel. Some sneak kisses behind the church. Some talk to peddlers too long. Others, the ones who obey too well, become shadows, already ghosts, before they grow breasts. You watch them. You wonder which kind you'll be. By now, you're probably sharing a sleeping mat with your siblings. Or maybe you've been sent to serve in another household. That's common, especially if you're a second or third daughter. Around 7 or 8, you might be sent off to live with a local lord or another peasant family to learn your place. It's not adoption. It's servitude with a smile. There, you scrub floors, fetch water, watch babies, and try not to break anything expensive. If you do, they'll take it out of your mother's grain share. You miss her, but you pretend you don't. Debate line. Historians still argue whether these foster-like arrangements were exploitative child labor or opportunities for social mobility and skill building. Some girls thrive. They learn embroidery, how to prepare a roast, how to make rose water from petals, and patience. Others fade, overworked, underfed, silenced. But all of them learn how to survive under someone else's roof. Every feast day, you see flashes of wonder, dancing, music, sweets made with honey, silk ribbons. You tuck those memories away like jewels, because most days are gray and wet and full of ache. Still, you're growing. Your voice changes. Your hands grow calloused. You begin to understand what's being whispered in corners when women cluster together. You catch a word here, a warning there, something about blood, about men, about staying clean. Your innocence doesn't end all at once. It slips away gradually, like a ribbon, untied and lost in the mud. And when your body begins to change, when your chest begins to ache and your hips take shape, everything shifts, even the way people look at you. But that's a story for tomorrow night. For now, you lay down your head. You're still a child, mostly. You dream of apple trees, braided hair, and the sound of bells, not meant for funerals. You feel it before you understand it. A heaviness in your belly, a strange ache in your legs, and then warmth. A slow, sticky warmth between your thighs. The moment it happens, everything changes. There's blood. Not from a scrape or a fall, but from somewhere deeper, inside you. Your hands shake. Maybe you're 12, maybe you're 14. If you're noble, your maid sees the stains before you do. If you're poor, it's your mother who notices your hunched posture, the way you press your thighs together, the red spot on your only shift. There's no celebration, no cake, no cozy talk with a cup of tea. Instead, there's hushed urgency. You're taken aside, away from the men. You're handed cloth, scratchy, reused, boiled, and dried, sometimes stiff as bark. You're told not to touch bread while you're bleeding. You're warned not to walk near the well. And someone, your mother, an aunt, maybe a neighbor with too many opinions, leans in and mutters, "Now you're a woman. Oh, lucky you." Mainstream fact. Medieval society often treated menstruation as both a spiritual impurity and a medical curiosity. Menstruating women were frequently barred from entering churches, touching holy objects, or preparing food during their periods. You're no longer just a girl. You're beholden now to rules, to whispers, to watchful eyes. The world watches you differently, as if your womb has unlocked some secret passage into judgment. You walk into a room, and someone's already imagining how many children you'll bear, how many goats you're worth, how wide your hips might grow. You learn to tuck the cloth under your belt. You sit differently. You move more carefully. And you pray, whether you believe it or not, that no one will notice if you leak. No one talks about it openly, not in polite company. Blood is a private shame, not a sin exactly, but close enough that women cross themselves when it starts. Some say it's Eve's fault. Others say it's the moon. Some say you should bury the cloth in the ground afterward. Or else the devil might use it to curse your next child. If you're noble, you might have linen pads folded and tied with a sash. If you're poor, you use wool scraps or moss. Sometimes, nothing at all. No one says, period. They call it the curse, or your time, or the moon's wound. You learn to say, I'm unwell, and hope the midwife gives you a tea that doesn't taste like fermented pond water. Quirky detail. Some medieval folk believed that if a menstruating woman looked at a mirror, the glass would cloud and never clear again. So much for touching up your hair. Men pretend not to notice, or else they make jokes. Boys laugh in the fields about women's troubles, while you dig your fingernails into your palms and wish you could disappear into the turnip patch. And then come the real instructions. Your body now has a price. You're told not to smile too much, not to linger at the well, not to sing after sunset. If you attract attention, it's your fault. If a boy follows you home, it's because you walked wrong. If a man stares, it's because your veil was crooked. You're told to guard your virtue, as if it's a gold coin you might accidentally drop in the mud. But no one tells you what virtue actually is. Just that once it's gone, you're done for. Your mother tightens your laces a little more each day. Your chest is now a problem to be hidden. If you're lucky, you wear a supportive undergown. If not, you make do with clever folding and wishful thinking. You start noticing other girls, those a year or two older. Some are already betrothed. Some are already married. One of them, Sarah, has a baby on her hip, and the hollow look of someone who stopped being young the moment she was told, he's a good match. You're told to watch how you sit. Don't laugh too loud. Don't eat too fast. Don't run. That one hurts. You liked running. You're told to pray harder now, to confess more often. The priest gives you longer penance when you mention impure dreams, though you didn't choose to have them and aren't even sure what was happening. You start to hear more about saints. Saints who cut off their hair to avoid marriage. Saints who threw themselves off cliffs rather than marry pagans. Saints who stayed pure even when tortured. They're held up as ideals. You holding a lump of sheep's wool to your bleeding self. Wonder if holiness is just another kind of slow death. Debate line. Historians still argue whether the veneration of virgin martyrs empowered young medieval women or reinforced the impossible purity demanded of them. At night, you lie awake and feel your pulse between your legs. You wonder if it'll always be like this, if you'll always feel like a visitor in your own body. You listen to the wind rattle the shutters and try not to cry, because tears will get you nowhere except more scolding. Then comes the stranger, not all at once. First, it's his name, then his status, then the whispers. They're considering you for him, as if you're a position in a field, not a person. You've seen him once, maybe twice. He didn't look at you. That's a good sign, or a bad one. Hard to tell anymore. You ask your mother what he's like. She says, he has land. You ask if he's kind. She says, he's not cruel. You ask if she loves father. She says nothing. If you're lucky, your marriage will be arranged by someone who at least pretends to care. If not, you'll be bundled off with a dowry, a goat, some silver, a bolt of cloth, and exchanged for another family's daughter. This is what being a woman means. Now that you bleed, you are a contract waiting to be signed. And if you refuse, well, you've heard stories. Girls locked in cellars, sent to convents, declared mad, and left to wither in a tower with nothing but psalms for company. Still, you cling to small things. The smell of rosemary, the smile of a friend who understands, the sound of a song that says love might still exist somewhere under all this dust and doctrine. Some days, your blood doesn't come. You panic. You wonder if you've been cursed or blessed or worse. Other days, it won't stop. You fold cloth after cloth and think, this is how I die. But you don't, not today. Instead, you tuck in the linen, you straighten your kirtle, you tie your veil, just so. And you walk out into the morning with your head high. Not because you're fearless, but because everyone is watching. And fear is something women don't get to show. By now, the village knows. You're of age. You're a woman. And everything that means, good or bad, is about to unfold. The decision is made without you. There is no velvet box, no bouquet, no fumbling confession under the moon. There is only a conversation between men, at a table, over bread and ale, or in the echoing halls of a manor, where someone says, she's of age, and someone else nods and talks dowry, and just like that, you're engaged. If you're lucky, someone tells you before the banns are announced in church. If you're not, you hear your own name spoken aloud by the priest, wrapped around the name of a man you've never met, as villagers crane their necks to catch your expression. Congratulations, you're property now. Transfer pending. Mainstream fact. In the Middle Ages, marriages were often arranged as strategic alliances between families. Consent was expected, but in practice, a woman's ability to refuse was limited, especially among the nobility or rural peasantry. You're told it's an honor, that his farm is large, that he's not old, that he hasn't had too many wives, that your children will be strong, and your mother is already stitching your wedding coif. You sit silently, hands in your lap, nodding at the right times. You are good at that now. No one asks if you want this. They ask if you understand. And that's different. There's a moment, a quiet one, where your fingers tremble and your breath catches in your chest. You imagine what it would be like to run. Just bolt through the orchard, past the hedges, past the village wall. Keep going until the road gives way to something else. But that road always leads somewhere worse. A convent, a punishment, a life of suspicion and whispers. Runaway girls don't last long, so you stay and you prepare. The wedding comes quickly. Most marriages are timed with the agricultural calendar. After harvest, before planting, during the quiet lull of winter or the hopeful freshness of spring. Love doesn't dictate the date. Barley and sheep do. Your trousseau is simple. A chest with folded linen, maybe some wooden utensils, a belt, a comb, a small mirror. If you're noble, the chest is carved and the linens embroidered. If you're a peasant, it's practical. A blanket, a knife, a pan to hang over a fire. This is your inheritance, not land, not books, just the tools you'll need to survive in another man's house. The morning of your wedding, the church bells ring, not for you, but they're convenient. You're bathed, dressed, veiled. Your hair is brushed until it shines, or until your scalp burns, depending on how much your mother slept last night. You are, quite literally, given away. It's not symbolic. Your father hands you off, like a sheep, a pot, a favor owed. If you're lucky, the groom looks nervous. That means he's human. If he's smug, you brace yourself. You walk to the chapel. If you're rich, you're on horseback, with musicians trailing behind. If you're poor, you trudge through mud, holding your skirt above your ankles so the stains don't show. In the one moment when everyone is staring at you, the priest doesn't ask if you're in love. He asks if you're present. If you're willing, you're supposed to say, "I will." The Latin is mumbled. The rings are slipped. The kiss is sometimes skipped. The transaction is sealed. Bread and ale are shared. And then it's done. Quirky detail. In parts of medieval France and Germany, it was common to symbolically put the bride to bed during the feast. Guests would escort the couple to their bedchamber, sometimes even throwing grain at them as fertility encouragement. Privacy was overrated. And then comes the part no one prepared you for. Or rather, they did prepare you, but only in the form of vague warnings and meaningful looks. The bed. You lie beside a man who now owns your body. The law says he may not hurt you, but also that you must not deny him. You close your eyes. Maybe it's over quickly. Maybe it's not. Maybe you bleed. Maybe you don't. If you do, the sheets are shown off as proof. If you don't, you're suspected of being spoiled, already used. You try to cry silently. In the morning, you wake in a different bed, a different home, a different future, and no way back. There's no trial period, no annulment for bad vibes. Marriage is permanent, even if he's cruel, even if he drinks, even if he never speaks to you with anything but orders. The only easy way out of a marriage is death. And while that's a morbid thought, it becomes comforting more often than you'd expect. Your days begin with his voice, his needs, his fields, his supper, his children soon enough. You serve. That's your role now. Wife. The word tastes dusty in your mouth, but you say it with pride when neighbors ask. If you're lucky, he's gentle. If not, you learn how to move around him, how to stay small, how to endure. Debate line. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant women had more marital autonomy than noble women, since landless families had fewer strategic reasons to control unions. But cultural pressure and religious doctrine weighed heavily across all classes. And yet, even here, There are glimmers, moments when he looks at you across the hearth and his face softens. When he brings you honeycomb from the market. When he says your name and it doesn't sound like a command. When you laugh, truly laugh. Because for a moment, you are simply two humans trying to keep the roof from leaking. You meet other wives at the well. You trade gossip, recipes, survival tips. You help each other through births, deaths, lean years. You speak in code. He's in a mood today means stay away. I had a late moon means I'm scared. The Lord is good means I need hope. You learn to hold two truths at once. That you didn't choose this life. And that you will still live it as fully as you can. You cook stews from scraps and make them taste like feast. You mend clothes until the fabric is more patch than original. You light candles on saints' days and thank the Virgin for a moment of silence before dawn. You find comfort in rhythm, in tasks, in routine. You sweep the same floor, braid the same hair, fold the same linens your mother taught you to fold. You hum songs your grandmother once sang. The world spins slowly, but you are its quiet anchor. And sometimes, late at night, you remember that girl you were, the one who thought about running. You wonder what happened to her. Then you realize she's still here, tucked beneath the layers of duty and cloth and ritual. She breathes, she survives, and when no one is watching, she dreams. The door creaks open before you can knock. A girl, not much older than you, bows her head quickly and pulls you inside. She's wearing a linen shift and a coif that's too tight, and she smells faintly of beeswax and lye. Upstairs, she says, not unkindly, my lady's waiting. You're new to the manor, barely out of your father's house, still blinking in disbelief that you're here at all. Your shoes are muddy, your hands are blistered, and you've never seen so much glass in a window before. Real glass. Wavy, smoky, expensive. You don't belong here. Not yet. But that's the thing about service in a noble household. No one belongs at first. You're expected to fold yourself in quietly, like dough rising under a cloth, until you become part of the rhythm. You wake when they wake. You eat after they've eaten. You speak only when spoken to, and even then, carefully. And above all, you serve. Mainstream fact. In the Middle Ages, large households, especially noble or royal, were staffed by dozens of female servants, ranging from kitchen scullions to personal maids. These roles were essential stepping stones for young women from poor or middling backgrounds, seeking security, marriage prospects, or social mobility. You climb the stairs, already dizzy with the smell of herbs and smoke, and find her waiting, the mistress. She sits near a window, draped with embroidered cloth, her fingers wrapped around a goblet of watered wine. Her gown is tight-laced and expensive, and her hair is hidden beneath a veil stitched with gold thread. She's older than you, but still young, maybe 20. Her eyes flick to you, assess you, then flick away again. You're dismissed without a word. But she watches how you close the door. This is your new reality. You serve a woman who is both like you and nothing like you. You both bleed, breathe, bruise. but only one of you does so in silk. At first, you feel invisible. You scrub the floors. You polish the goblets. You learn which spices go where, and how many drops of rose water she prefers in her linens. You know when she wants to be alone. You know when she's pretending to be asleep, so she doesn't have to speak to her husband. You see her at her best, hair cascading in waves as her maid braids it, skin glowing with scented oil. And you see her at her worst, screaming at the midwife, sobbing into her hands when another pregnancy ends too soon. You carry her secrets like a second apron, quirky detail. In elite households, noblewomen sometimes owned tiny lap dogs, known as comfort dogs, which were pampered and perfumed to help mask unpleasant chamber smells. You might end up feeding a dog better meals than you get yourself. She calls you girl at first, or sometimes you. If she's generous, she learns your name. If she's lonely, she asks about your family. If she's cruel, well, let's just say you keep your head down and your footsteps soft. The boundaries are always shifting. One moment she's scolding you for speaking too boldly. The next, she's pulling you into a private room to confess that she thinks her husband is taking a second mistress. You don't know what to say, so you just nod and listen and offer a cloth for her tears. In that room, just the two of you, you are equals in silence. But outside, in the hall, where the steward watches and the footmen linger and the kitchen girls gossip, you remember, you are not equals. You clean her combs. You button the back of her gown. You brush her hair until your fingers ache. And you smile when she calls you loyal. You don't tell her that loyalty and dependency often wear the same face. And what of the other women? The ones lower than you? The laundry girls with red chapped hands, the spit turners with soot on their faces, the dairymaids who smell of curdled milk and resignation. You watch them, and they watch you. You try not to rise too fast, or they'll call you proud. But if you stay too low, you'll be invisible forever. The kitchen is its own kingdom, loud, hot, overflowing with rules no one writes down. You carve out a little respect with your silence, your speed, your ability to balance a tray of goblets through a corridor full of dogs and drunk men without spilling a drop. And the other maids, you bond quickly, or you don't. Some become sisters, whispering dreams of marriage and escape under straw mattresses. Others become threats, watching for your missteps, eager to climb one rung higher by pulling you down. Debate line. Historians still argue whether domestic service empowered medieval women with social opportunity or simply exposed them to new forms of exploitation within hierarchical households. And then there's him, not the Lord, hopefully. Though sometimes, yes. The glances, the casual touches, the way he lingers too long in the solar. But more often, it's the steward, the squire, the visiting knight who thinks your presence is part of the entertainment. You learn fast that your body is always noticed. Even when you try to disappear, sometimes the mistress protects you. Sometimes she looks the other way. Sometimes she blames you. Don't tempt them, she might hiss, as if temptation lies in your patched kirtle and calloused hands. So you navigate carefully. You learn when to laugh, when to cry, when to be useful, when to vanish. But sometimes, just sometimes, there is friendship. You share a smile over the embroidery frame. She teaches you to read a prayer. You help her write a letter she's not supposed to send. You whisper stories from your village that make her laugh in a way her husband never has. One night, she gives you a ribbon. It doesn't suit me, she says, but you both know it's a gift. A fragile, beautiful thing. You sleep with it under your pillow and dream of something kinder. Years pass. Or maybe just months. You change. She does too. You watch her belly swell, her ankles puff, her hands tremble. You fetch the midwife. You boil water. You hold her hand while she screams. You pray aloud, even if you've stopped believing in miracles. And when it's over, when the baby cries or doesn't, you're the one who washes her face, who brings the broth, who sits beside her when no one else does. She thanks you, for real, and for a moment, just a flicker, you remember, she is trapped too, in a different gilded cage, one with thicker walls and fewer doors. You pity her, you admire her, you fear becoming her. Then someone calls for you from the hall. A tray is waiting. A floor needs scrubbing. A guest has arrived, and you go because you're the maid, the servant, the girl behind the veil. But you know her secrets now, and someday, if the world turns kindly, you'll use them. The choice comes sooner than you expect, and not in the form of a question, but a statement. You're of age, your mistress says one morning, not looking up from her embroidery. Your father's dead. Your brother's taken your dowry for himself, hasn't he? You say nothing, which is answer enough. She sighs softly and pulls her thread taut. Then it's time you made yourself useful in some other way. She doesn't mean it cruelly. In fact, she might be trying to help. You've served her faithfully for years, shared quiet moments, buried secrets between sheets and silences. But this household does not keep idle women. So you're given 3 doors. None of them are locked, but none of them are open wide either. Mainstream fact. By the high Middle Ages, unmarried women without family support had limited futures. They might marry if they had a dowry. They might become nuns if a convent would take them, or they might become social outcasts, labeled as loose or fallen, working as beggars, midwives, or worse. The steward explains it plainly. There's a convent 2 villages over, run by Benedictine sisters. There's a widower mason in need of a wife. 3 children, bad teeth, or you can leave with nothing. The choice is yours, he says, but not really. You're no fool. You've seen what happens to women who try to live without men or the church. You saw one once, mud on her skirts, muttering in the square, hair chopped like a penitent's. The town boys threw stones at her, and no one stopped them. You're not brave enough for that. Not yet. So, you choose the convent. Not because you crave prayer, but because it's the only place where your body might finally be left alone. The road there is muddy and long, and the cart that brings you shakes every bone in your spine. The nun beside you smells of dried lavender and onions, and she doesn't speak, just watches the trees go by, like she's memorizing their sins. The convent sits on a hill, cold stone, simple gate. The chapel bell rings even before you reach the door. Inside, silence, not peace, silence. You are given a gray robe and a cold bed. The mattress is stuffed with straw, and the window is just a slit in the wall. You're not here to be comfortable. You're here to die to the world. At least that's what the abbess says. Quirky detail. Some convents grew wealthy and powerful, owning land, receiving noble daughters, even producing beer or cheese for trade. Others were poor, drafty places where nuns patched their own habits and survived on cabbage stew and strict silence. The days are predictable, too predictable. Matins, lauds, work, study, mass, silence, soup, psalms, sleep, repeat. You copy manuscripts until your fingers cramp. You grow herbs with names older than Latin. You learn that some prayers are sung, some whispered, and some carved into stone. You cut your hair, and every night you lie awake wondering if you chose wrongly, because you're not sure you believe in all of this. The saints, the relics, the rules. But you do believe in quiet. And in this place, quiet is a kind of shield until the world creeps in. It happens one rainy afternoon when a noble carriage arrives unannounced. Inside, a girl of 14 with red-rimmed eyes and a bruise hidden under powder. She's taking the veil, they say, but you can see the truth behind the veil. Another daughter discarded, another pawn moved off the board. She clings to you that first night. Terrified, you whisper to her about the hawks nesting on the bell tower and how the bread is better on Tuesdays. You make her laugh, and for a while, you remember how to be kind. But kindness is a luxury here. Some sisters look at you as if you're too worldly. You suspect they know you came here not for piety, but protection. Others look at you with longing. You know what they've given up. You know how many still dream of escape. One winter, the abbess dies. No one speaks for a full day. The chapel is colder than ever. And suddenly, the order starts to fray. Quiet rebellions in the kitchen. Arguments over who will lead. Whispered doubts during compline. You wonder if it's a sign. And then one day he returns. The widower, teeth mended. Children grown. A bit of coin in his pouch and loneliness in his eyes. He stands in the courtyard, hat in hand, and says he's looking for That dark-haired girl from Lady Aveline's manor. He means you, and for the first time in years, you feel something unexpected. Power, because now you decide you could leave the convent, marry him, have a hearth, a name, children, a roof. You could stay, let your hair go gray behind these walls. Or you could walk away, not to disgrace, but to something else, because there is a fourth path, one not offered, one not blessed, but real. You could become a healer, or a scribe, or a midwife. You could move to a town where no one knows your name and start again. You've seen enough blood and bone and sorrow to know that survival is its own form of sanctity. Scholarly debate. While many medieval women were funneled into strict life paths, some scholars argue there were more fluid options than records suggest, especially for laywomen outside nobility who could carve out niches as herbalists, businesswomen, or even landholders. You look at the widower, you look at the chapel, you look at the open gate, muddy and waiting, and then you smile, because the world has always told women like you what to be: nun, widow, wretch. But you're none of those. You're a survivor, and you're not done yet. You stir before the rooster does. There's no sun yet, just a milky strip on the horizon. The dew makes your sleeves damp as you fumble for your shoes, which aren't shoes so much as stitched leather hopes. Cold, cracked, and one has a hole near the heel. Still, they're yours. You slip them on, tuck your woolen dress under your belt, and brace for another day in the fields. You don't own the fields own you, but you're getting clever about it. This morning, you're one of dozens gathering outside the Reeve's house, a thatched hut near the manor's granary. The Reeve is the middleman, a peasant like you, but trusted by the Lord to keep order and collect dues. He smells like barley and arrogance, but today he's late, and the whispers are loud. 3 more days of plowing and no bread in return. One woman hisses, another retorts. I heard in Wisset. The women stopped, and the steward begged. It's dangerous talk, but it's not just talk anymore. You've labored since childhood. First, carrying water and firewood, then catching chickens, then weeding barley rows until your fingernails bled black. Now, as a grown woman, you reap and thresh and spin until your shoulders ache. This is the life carved out for your class. Free in name, yet tied by obligation. Corvée they call it. Labor owed to the Lord. Not paid in coin, but demanded like taxes in sweat. But things are shifting in the soil beneath your calloused feet. You remember when your grandmother spoke of the famine, when 7 straight months of wet harvest left whole villages hungry. Not far from here, mothers boiled bitter roots and fed them to infants who didn't make it through the next frost. Back then, no one dared question their duty. Hunger has a way of silencing you. Now, you're not so silent. In towns further east, you've heard of guilds, groups of tradespeople banding together to protect wages and train apprentices. Most are men, of course, smiths and masons. But in Norwich and York, women weavers have begun joining their own sisterhoods. Not official ones. The charters don't welcome your kind yet, but enough to push back when a merchant tries to cheat. You aren't part of a guild, but you've built something else. Every third morning, before work, the women gather near the stream. You call it talking to the reeds, but it's strategy. Who's working where? Who owes what? Who was shorted bread? Who had to send a child into service to pay last winter's seed debt? It's not rebellion. Not exactly. It's survival by committee. Today, word spreads that the steward will ride through. He's come from the abbey to inspect the village accounts. That means faces will be washed, skirts unwrinkled, and back talk silenced. But not your friend Isolde. Isolde never learned silence. She strides past you, hair braided with red thread, an old charm against envy, and dumps her sack of turnips straight onto the steward's path. For what I'm paid, your horse can eat them, she says, gasps. Someone laughs. Someone else hisses. Isolde, hush. The steward snorts, literally, and demands her name. You wait for her to bow, apologize, cry. She doesn't. She stares at him until he blinks. Later, he'll demand her son join the monastery kitchen as penance. But not before she plants the seed. No one volunteers extra hours that week. Here's the thing. Historians still argue whether women in your position, field laborers on medieval manors, had real power or just temporary leverage. Some say you were at the mercy of the seasons, the stewards, and the men. Others suggest moments like this: refusals, alliances, informal pacts were the earliest signs of peasant resistance. You don't care what they argue. You care that by harvest's end, you worked 2 fewer unpaid days than last year. That's 2 days you spent brewing ale for sale, under the table. 2 days of coin, not commands. 2 days of something like choice. Night comes fast in late autumn. You finish your last pass of the field, thresher swinging like a tired metronome, and glance at the ridge where the sun is leaking tangerine behind black trees. Your palms are blistered. Your hair smells like smoke and thistle sap. You walk home with 5 others, Isolde among them. No one talks, but no one bows their head either. Tomorrow, you'll wake before the rooster again. But tonight, you lie down on the straw-stuffed mattress, exhale, and think. Maybe we're not just surviving. Maybe we're organizing. Somewhere, a reeve rolls over in his sleep and dreams of peaceful peasants. He'll be disappointed. Mainstream fact. Most peasant women in medieval Europe owed labor to their lord under the corvée system, working certain days for no pay, usually during planting and harvest. Quirky detail. Some rural women believed braiding red thread into their hair protected against envy and theft, especially when working in groups. Scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant women had meaningful agency within manorial systems, or whether apparent resistance was just tolerated deviation. The knock comes in the dead of night. 2 raps, then a pause, then 1 more. That's the signal. You're already sitting up. Cloak half on, boots under your knees, herbs bundled in the corner. You don't even need the candlelight to find the bag. It's always where you left it. By the hearth, stitched from goat hide, soft from years of gripping, and heavier than it looks. Inside are the tools that make you both trusted and feared. A bone-handled blade, a strip of lambskin soaked in salt, a bundle of mugwort and yarrow, a tiny pewter cross, dented, and the real treasure, tucked in waxed cloth at the bottom, is a lump of honey-soaked wool and the tiniest scrap of a saint's robe. They call it superstition. You call it insurance. Tonight's mother is Marta, third child, wide hips, but she's bled too much with the last. You cross the sleeping square quickly, skirt flapping in the wind, as your breath fogs the air. The town is mostly quiet, except for the baker's apprentice snoring in the alley and the clatter of hooves somewhere far off. Maybe a night rider. When you enter Marta's cottage, it smells like fear and wood smoke. But you've been here before. You kneel beside her, place one hand on the belly, the other on the pulse. Slow, weak. You nod once and whisper to the girl, holding her hand. Probably a sister. Heat more water and bring vinegar. The room clears. That's the rule. Only the living and the birthing stay inside. Marta is sweating now, eyes rolling a little. The baby is stubborn. You press her thighs and whisper prayers that are partly Latin, partly your grandmother's Gaelic, and mostly improvised. No one knows exactly which saint handles childbirth. Maybe Saint Margaret, maybe Mary, but you invoke both, just in case. The bag opens. Your fingers move fast, then slow. You have done this more than 60 times, and yet, every time feels like your last. Midwives are strange creatures in this century. You don't wear a cross around your neck. The church says midwives must, to prove you're not a heretic. But you wear it in your bag instead, because when Marta is screaming, it gets in the way. You've read no book. You cannot write your name, but you've turned babies inside wombs, stitched torn flesh by firelight, and whispered last rites over infants who never took a breath. You carry secrets in your fingertips, sometimes literal ones, like the mother last spring who came to you with coin and shame and said, "It's not the right time." You knew what she meant. The herbs in the small pouch. Don't ask questions. Back in Marta's room, the child is crowning. You press and breathe with her. When she screams, you scream too, not in pain, but in command. You yell over her like a general. Push. Again. Harder now. And then release. A wet mewling sound, like a kitten gasping. The baby is here. You check for cord, for blood, for breath. A girl, squalling already, red as wine. You wrap her in cloth, rub her feet, whisper a thank you to the dead midwife who trained you. You do not cry, but later, when you return home, you will stare at your hands in the firelight, and you will remember every sound Marta made. You always do. Here's something no one tells you in the cathedral scrolls. In many towns, especially in France, Italy, and parts of England, midwives like you have more legal standing than priests when it comes to first breath. Because if a child is born dying, and you say the words, just a whispered ego te baptizo. The baptism is valid. You're not ordained, but in that moment you outrank a bishop. Of course, the priests hate that, which is why they come asking questions. How did you learn this? Did you study? Do you know Latin? What is in your bag? Why do your clients survive more often than others? You answer only what you must. You smile politely, and you never ever show them the scrap of a saint's robe. You hide in the lining. In time, they will try to regulate you. They'll demand licenses, oaths of obedience. They'll say you must report all deaths and all strange herbs. In some towns, they'll arrest women like you who act above their place. But for now, your place is wherever a child is being born, which means your place is everywhere. That morning, after Martha sleeps and the baby is fed, you leave quietly. The sun is just starting to rise over the bakery. Your bag is a little lighter, but you feel heavier somehow. Every life you pull into this world becomes another you must carry. And though you walk alone, you are never really alone. The bag hums with memory and secrets and the knowledge that somewhere, even now, a woman stirs and calls your name. Mainstream fact. By the high Middle Ages, 12th, 14th centuries, midwives in towns had semi-official roles and sometimes legal standing to perform emergency baptisms and deliver reports to church officials. Quirky detail. Some midwives carried hidden relics or charms like threads of saintly robes or bits of consecrated wax in their birthing bags to protect mothers and infants. Regardless of church approval, scholarly debate. Medieval historians continue to debate whether midwives were empowered community healers or persecuted folk practitioners, gradually marginalized by emerging male-dominated medicine. Your bare feet on warm cobblestones. A soft breeze curls through the narrow alley. Somewhere, faint laughter echoes from behind a veil of steam. You're clutching a wooden pail and a linen wrap, heart pounding, not from fear, but anticipation. Today is bath day, and in the Middle Ages, that's not a given. Let's be clear, people in the Middle Ages did bathe. Maybe not daily, and definitely not with fancy shampoos. But the popular idea that everyone just marinated in their own grime for years. Not quite right. You duck through a low archway and step into the dim warmth of a public bathhouse. A stew, as they're called in England. The air smells of rosemary, ash, and something a little sour. But there's also heat. Real, bone-deep warmth. Fires stoked from dawn. Steam rising like spirits. And women, some in shifts, some bare, chatting, scrubbing, gossiping. There's a rhythm here. Scrub, rinse, soak, whisper. The bathhouse isn't just where you clean your limbs. It's where beauty meets belief. You find your corner. An older woman with arms like rolling pins offers you her miracle balm. You recognize the scent. Eggs, sheep tallow, and something sharp, like vinegar. She winks, gets the freckles out. You nod like you believe her, but freckles aren't your problem today. It's the rash under your stays. It's the itching from coarse wool. It's the hope that, just for an hour, you can smell like something other than churned butter and wood smoke. Here's the thing. Medieval women had a whole arsenal of beauty routines. Most weren't queens, but they still made lye soap from ashes and animal fat. They rinsed their hair with barley water. They plucked stray hairs with tweezers the size of thumbtacks. Some even bleached their hair with mixtures of alum, quicklime, and sun. Yes, sun. They'd sit outside with their hair spread over cardboard frames like some medieval solar panel. And don't get us started on perfumes. If you were rich, or at least sneaky, you might dab rose water behind your ears. If you were truly brave, deer musk, ambergris, or fermented urine. Scent was class, but it was also power. A whiff of cinnamon might mean your husband's returned from the east. A hint of lavender? Maybe the apothecary's daughter walked by, but it wasn't all petals and honey. Bathhouses were flashpoints for something deeper. Spiritual anxiety. For one, you see, the church had a complicated relationship with bathing. On the one hand, cleanliness was godliness, right? Monasteries had sophisticated water systems. Nuns learned to mix rose oil with beeswax and mint to anoint the sick. On the other hand, too much bathing? Suspicious, especially for women. Especially if you looked like you were enjoying it. Historians still argue whether bathhouses were primarily places of health, hygiene, or hedonism. You can sort of see why. In some towns, men and women bathed together, separated only by curtains, or not at all. There were candlelit stews with pipe music and wine. There were places with signs that promised healing, but also offered massages that didn't exactly stop at the shoulders. You dunk your face in a basin of lukewarm water, the sting of soap on your eyelids, the thrill of emerging from the water, hair slicked, cheeks pink, knowing you look, if not regal, then at least alive. You might not get another bath for a month, or longer. The plague is whispering rumors in the next town, and with it, fear. Fear that heat opens your pores to disease, that bathhouses spread sin faster than filth. Already, bishops are urging towns to close them. Priests warn against naked leisure. And soon, many of these stews will be boarded up, fire pits cooled, buckets left to dry. But for now, you towel off with scratchy linen and smile at the older woman. She offers you a clay pot of something brown and fragrant. You don't ask what's in it. You dab it on your temples anyway. Back out in the sunlight, your skin is warm and tight. You feel cleaner, lighter, maybe even sacred. You smell like rosemary and secrets. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you already crave your next soak. The air inside the market walls doesn't smell like you hoped it would. It's not cinnamon or fresh-cut herbs, not even yeasty bread. No, it's old fish, warm bodies, and the faint sting of pickled cabbage. You wrinkle your nose and keep walking. This is where trade happens, where coin clinks, and where women, yes, plenty of women, run the show more than you'd think. Forget what you imagined about medieval women locked in castles or stuck in kitchens. Step through these gates, and you're in a different world. This is where women sell, shout, argue, barter, and sometimes even curse like sailors, especially the ones who sell herring. Those women, known as fishwives, have developed a reputation that's somehow both fearsome and affectionate. They're loud, fast-talking, and sharp with a knife. Not just for fish either. You pull your shawl tighter as the breeze cuts through the narrow lanes between stalls. Straw crunches underfoot, mixed with slush and the occasional unidentifiable squish you pretend not to think about. A boy runs past with a basket of apples, followed by his red-faced mother yelling about bruises. Somewhere, a goat bleats indignantly. The entire place buzzes with life, and most of it flows through female hands. The market is a woman's battlefield, and theater all in one. You pass a woman selling dyed wool, her fingers stained blue and red. She doesn't glance up as she counts coins with one hand and spins a tale with the other, entertaining customers with gossip from 2 villages over. At the next stall, a baker's daughter hawks sweet oat cakes, while her mother stirs something bubbling over a charcoal brazier. The scent is better here. You pause longer than necessary, letting it wrap around your nostrils like a warm blanket. Markets were some of the only spaces where women could wield public power without being nobility or nuns. Sure, guilds usually kept the best jobs for men, but widows could inherit workshop rights, and some women carved out influence through sheer stubborn survival. Breweries, for example, were once the domain of women. Ale was food, not fun, and making it was as domestic as baking bread. Alewives became common enough that their signs, a broom above the door or a cat in the window, were widely recognized. That is, until they got too successful. You reach a stall with bunches of lavender, dried thyme, and marigolds hanging from the awning. The woman running it, older, wiry, eyes like flint, gives you a once-over. She's not here to charm, she's here to sell. You point at a bundle, and she names a price that makes you blink. You haggle. She haggles harder. Finally, you fork over 2 coins, and she doesn't smile as she hands you the herbs. But there's a faint nod. Respect. Hard-earned. Come back if your man gets the pox. She calls after you. I've got something for that too. You're not sure whether to laugh or run. Markets, after all, weren't just about goods. They were places of rumor, alliance, competition, and performance. People didn't just trade fish and cloth. They traded use, favors, glances. For a woman, especially one without land or noble birth, this was a lifeline. Of course, not all were free to participate. Laws could be strict. In some towns, women couldn't sell unless under a husband's name. Others allowed unmarried women to register as femmes sole, legal individuals who could own property and run businesses. Historians still argue whether this was a sign of social progress or just a loophole for local governments to keep tax rolls tidy. Then there's the church, watching closely. Women who got too rich were suspect. Accusations of greed, witchcraft, or moral laxity lurked like mold in damp corners. You remember the alewives? By the time you hit the late Middle Ages, the image of a woman brewing beer turns from wholesome to unsettling. Cauldrons, cats, flying brooms. It doesn't take a genius to connect the dots. Some say the witch stereotype was born from market women who got a little too good at their trade. You reach the center of the market, a clearing where officials weigh grain, settle disputes, and sometimes collect taxes with cheerful malevolence. A woman nearby is trying to talk her way out of a fine for short measures. Her voice rises. She gestures to the scale, to the inspector, to the heavens. It doesn't look like she's winning, but she doesn't back down either. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the reflection of a copper pot. You look like everyone else here, tired, busy, proud. You didn't choose to be a merchant or seller, but it's better than starving. And on market day, for just a little while, you feel less invisible. Then there's the whisper of scandal. You overhear two women talking about a merchant's wife who's been selling more than just lace behind her stall. You're not sure whether they mean she's moonlighting as a moneylender or something else entirely. Either way, it makes the market more thrilling. Nearby, a man trips and curses loudly. No one pays him any mind. He's outnumbered here. You find yourself next to a girl, no older than 12, swatting flies off a wheel of cheese. She doesn't look bored. She looks ready. This is her world already. The bell rings. Market's closing. You clutch your herbs, your day's gains, your observations. You've witnessed a small miracle, a space where women aren't background characters, but main players. Loud, messy, imperfect, but undeniably present. And as the gates creak shut, you wonder how many of their stories ever make it into the chronicles, the sermons, the dusty ledgers of history. Probably not many, but you saw them, you were one of them. And tomorrow, they'll be back. So will you. You kneel in the garden just before dawn, hands cold from brushing the dew off nettles and mugwort. The sky is the color of ash, and the birds haven't quite started their gossip yet. You move carefully. The rosemary mustn't bruise. The roots of angelica must be pulled at the right angle, or they split, and that's no good for the poultices. You don't say a word while you work, not because of some superstition, but because the old woman who taught you swore that the plants listened and didn't like chatterboxes. She's gone now, burned. Not for any crime anyone could explain clearly. Some said her potions caused miscarriages. Others said they prevented them. Her garden shriveled days after they came for her. Some said that proved she was a witch. You knew it was just that no one watered the soil after she screamed. Your hands are the only ones left in this part of the village that still know which root soothes the ache of birding, which leaf cools the fever of infection, which prayer the abbess might tolerate you whispering over a tincture. And so they come, women with hunched backs and secret tears. Men sometimes too, ashamed to be seen, but desperate for the medicine. And every time they knock, you weigh your life. Because healing in this age is not only sacred, it's dangerous. The line between herbalist and heretic is so thin, you could cut your thumb on it. And many did. You were never trained in the universities, like the monk physicians with their books in Latin and their insistence that balance of humors mattered more than experience. You have no official apprenticeship, no scroll of recognition, Only your gut, your memory, and your grandmother's whispers about foxglove and feverfew. But that is enough for most women. Because the monks don't visit the homes of the poor. They don't wipe blood from thighs, or hold down the possessed, or know the way a woman's eyes can go wide and dark just before the soul leaves. You do. You're not alone, of course. Across the medieval world, countless women like you toil in quiet spaces. Herb wives, midwives, charmers, bone setters. Some are married to blacksmiths, some are widows, some are cloistered nuns with little gardens behind their convent walls. Some are simply alone. And that aloneness becomes their curse. Because aloneness is suspicious. The church does not care for women who whisper to plants instead of confessors. And as fears of disease, bad harvests, or stillbirths rise, so too does the old itch to blame someone. Historians still argue whether the witch trials were about genuine belief in the supernatural or thinly veiled attempts to silence outspoken, independent women. Either way, the outcome was often the same: the flames. The term witch evolves over time. In earlier medieval centuries, it's less gendered. Sorcery could belong to a man or a woman. But by the 13th and 14th centuries, the church and its inquisitors start weaving new tales. That women are more carnal, more susceptible to the devil, more dangerous when left to think too much. In papal bulls and inquisitorial manuals, women's bodies become evidence. Midwives are particularly vulnerable. Their intimate knowledge of reproduction and miscarriage places them in a strange place, both needed and feared. The same hands that help bring life can be accused of stealing it. One bizarre bit of lore that crops up in several trial records: that witches collect male genitals and hide them in birds' nests, feeding them oats. Yes, really. A German inquisitor recorded that as proof of satanic mischief. And then there's the healing. A crushed snail with nettle leaf might soothe a boil, but if the patient dies, you must have cursed them. If they recover, magic. So, again, you must be in league with something foul. There's no winning. The 15th century sees the publication of Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, a manual for identifying and prosecuting witches. It insists women are more impressionable and thus more likely to be witches. Written by men, of course. It becomes a bestseller because of course it does. It also becomes a death sentence for hundreds, maybe thousands. You remember when a healer 2 villages over was accused. She tried to defend herself in court, quoted scripture, showed her prayer beads, explained her salves. They laughed, said the devil was clever, burned her anyway. And so you stay quiet. You let the rumors swirl. Some whisper you can call storms. Others say your herbs saved a merchant's son from lung rot. You say nothing. Better they wonder than accuse. Still, sometimes a girl comes to you with a secret that she saw her future husband in a dream, or that her belly grows when it shouldn't. You give her fennel, maybe whisper a charm, maybe not. Who's to say? Even in cities, where the presence of universities and surgeons grows stronger, The poor still trust women like you. The physicians prefer noble clients. They disdain dirty homes and screams of childbirth. You take everyone because pain doesn't care about class. The irony, of course, is that many of the cures used by monks and official doctors came from people like you. Your recipes, passed down woman to woman, filtered up into the university world, stripped of credit. A monk with a mortar and pestle is a scholar. A woman with the same tools is a sorceress. In some places, the persecution is sporadic. In others, systematic. Salem wasn't the beginning. It was a grim echo. The European continent had centuries of trials, drownings, and burnings before New England ever lit a pyre. And yet, somehow, you endure, because women always have. Through the plagues, through the whispers, through the sermons, and the scorn, you gather herbs, you tend wounds, you ease fevers, you deliver babies with hands steady as iron. They may not write your name in their chronicles, but every village remembers you. Your kind is both feared and loved. A paradox wrapped in rosemary and rue. And when you die, if you're lucky, a girl will pick up your apron and begin again, gathering nettles before dawn, whispering to the plants, not because they listen, but because you did. You sit on a low bench, the wood uneven beneath your thighs, and your fingers ache before the sun has fully risen. Thread after thread, you pull the story through cloth. It is slow work, quiet work, but not mindless, not like pounding laundry or stirring stew. This is a different kind of labor, a language stitched one needle prick at a time. The linen frame creaks slightly as you pull the wool taut. You're working on the boar hunt scene today. A nobleman, faceless still, raising his spear at a creature that looks more like a dog than a wild pig. That's all right. No one expects realism, only symbolism. You learn to embroider when you are barely tall enough to hold a frame steady. First flowers, then borders, then beasts and saints and battles. Every girl does, if she's lucky enough to be born into a house with linen and light. If not, she learns on scraps, fraying sleeves, patched shawls, used up veils. A girl must make beauty where she can. But for noble women, for nuns, and even for a few clever wives of merchants, tapestry is legacy. Not your name, of course. Never that. But your thread? It lives longer than parchment, longer than memory. It gets hung on stone walls and unfurled at feast days. It wraps the backs of pews and the altars of kings. Your needlework becomes the way history is told, even if no one remembers whose hands told it. 1,000 threads, 1,000 secrets. The Bayou Tapestry. You've heard of it, even if you'll never see it. Nearly 70 meters long, recounting the conquest of England in 1066. Men study it for battles and ships. But you notice the horse's legs, the expressions of the women at the funeral scene, the borders full of beasts that aren't quite lions or dogs. That tapestry is a battlefield, yes, but also a poem, a woman's whisper in the margins. Historians today debate who made it. Some say noblewomen of English households. Others say nuns from a Norman convent. No one knows for sure. That's the trouble with invisible labor. It leaves behind beauty, but not signatures. And even beyond Bayou, tapestry and embroidery are more than decoration in your world. They are records. They tell tales when books are too rare, too expensive, or too church-bound to reflect everyday life. A woven panel can show courtship or coronation, childbirth or martyrdom, all without a single written word. You know the rules. Blue for the virgin, red for martyrdom, gold for royalty, green for hope or the land. But you also know how to break them, just a little. A thread of indigo here, where it wasn't called for. A cheek, a little too flushed. A glance, stitched between two figures that the pattern didn't mention. Just enough rebellion to be yours. In convents, embroidery is a holy duty. Nuns stitch altar cloths and saints' banners in silence, praying with each knot. Some believe the very act of embroidery sanctifies the soul, disciplining idle hands and wandering thoughts. You wonder sometimes if that's really true, or if it's just a way to keep women busy, quiet, productive. Still, it calms you. You've seen women grieve through embroidery, stitching their stillborn child's initials into a flower's curve, weaving a dead husband's favorite colors into a border no one will notice. Love lives in the threads. War too. You once helped a lady sew a battle banner, her husband's crest emblazoned against a crimson field. She wept as she worked, though she claimed it was just the dust. He never returned. The banner did. Torn, mud-stained, still stitched strong. Embroidery travels, with traders, with brides, with armies. A merchant's wife might pass a pattern to her daughter in another city. A captured noblewoman might bring the fashion of her court into a foreign land. And though women are rarely the storytellers in songs or scrolls, their work whispers across generations, from cloak to altar to cradle. One scholar, centuries later, will look at your work under glass and wonder if it meant anything beyond decoration. She'll never guess how you wove your sister's name into the vine, or that the lion's paw was shaped like your father's, or that the flowers were the same as those at the monastery, where your lover fled to become a monk. Every thread means something, especially the ones no one asks about. Of course, not every tale stitched is safe. There are those who say a tapestry once revealed too much, a scandal or a secret, that a noblewoman embroidered the wrong initials, or a nun included a symbol linked to heresy. Those works vanish quickly, burned, buried, unstitched. Sometimes, so do the women. Still, the work goes on, because women must leave their marks somehow, in letters that won't be kept, in songs no bard will sing, in cloth that might hang on a wall for 100 years, seen by kings and cooks alike. You press your fingers to your lips, then to the thread. The boar still needs tusks, the nobleman a face, and you are the ghost in the weave. The stone is cold, even in spring. You trace your fingers along it every morning when you wake, as if it might remember something you've forgotten. The wall is smooth in places, chipped in others. You know every ridge like you know your own hands. This is your world now. 3 walls, a barred window, a heavy wooden door, and silence. Sweet, bitter silence. You are not always behind walls. Once, you laughed in the market square. You argued with your sister over the price of a chicken. You cried on your wedding night, not from fear, but from fury. He was older, richer. You were sold, not married. You said so, loudly, often, too often, perhaps. Walls are not always made of stone. Sometimes they are made of whispered prayers and iron rules, of fathers' commands and priests' sermons, of everything you were told you could not do, could not be. They said your voice was too sharp, that you read too many books, that you dreamed too much and bore too little. So they built walls. Some are sent to the convent, some to marriage, some to cells far darker. The convent is a softer cage, but a cage still. Nuns move quietly through the cloisters, whispering prayers as if God might be sleeping. Their robes brush against the floor like ghosts who have given up escape. Some came willingly, many did not. A dowry too small. To the convent, too many daughters. To the convent, a scandal brewing. Hide her behind a veil and call it divine. Inside, life is rhythmic, ordered. The bell rings and you rise. The bell rings and you kneel. The bell rings and you eat, pray, sing, sleep. Your thoughts become measured in strokes of the bell. But your mind, it wanders. Some women thrive in this walled world. They read, study, copy texts by candlelight. Some become abbesses, wise and powerful, wielding land and influence in subtle ways. These are rare victories, but they exist. You cling to those stories like bread crusts. Then there are the anchorites. You shudder even now to think of them. Women who ask, yes, ask, to be enclosed forever in a small room, often attached to a church. Their rite is a funeral. They lie down. The priest blesses them. The door is bricked shut. They speak to no one but God through a slit in the wall. Some are revered. Some go mad. Some both. Why do they choose this? Safety, sanctity, despair. Perhaps they were like you once, longing for a room that felt like their own, even if it meant giving up the sky. And then there are the prisons, not the ones for thieves and drunkards, the quiet ones, the private ones. A nobleman's wife locked in a tower, a disobedient daughter hidden away in a country estate, a widow declared mad for speaking to the wrong spirit. There are no trials for such women, only decisions made by men who say they love them. Your cell is small, yes, but there are smaller ones, the kind carved inside the body. Shame, grief, obedience, stitched into the skin like a seam. You once heard of a woman who carved prayers into her cell wall with a chicken bone. Another who taught mice to come when she hummed. Another who scratched a hole through wood with nothing but her own fingernails and ran, naked, screaming. They called her possessed, but maybe she was just done being quiet. The world outside does not miss you. It forgets you faster than wax forgets a flame. But you remember. You remember what it felt like to run, to bleed, to want. And sometimes, when no one is watching, you dance. Just a little. A sway of the hips, a turn of the wrist, a rebellion the size of a heartbeat. And there are others, even now. Girls, learning to read by candlelight. Eyes, sharp with fire. Women, bartering quietly for books, for herbs, for secrets. Widows with locked rooms and louder voices. They stretch, they grow. Even behind walls, roots push through stone. You press your hand to the wall again. This time, you feel something shift. Not much, but enough. You whisper, not a prayer, but a promise that one day someone will write your name, that these walls will tell your story, not just of silence, but of survival. The crown was never enough. It shimmered in torchlight. Sure, it glinted on feast days. It weighed heavy on the head and heavier on the spine. But for some women, some queens, it was not the final prize. No, it was the first. The sword came next. You wake in a tent that smells of damp linen and blood. Not your blood. Not yet. A standard flaps outside. Your family's sigil, embroidered by trembling nuns months ago. The fire's gone out. You slept in your armor again. No lady should, they say. It will crush your ribs and ruin your beauty. But what good is a beauty to a queen who must ride at dawn? You're not a wife today, not a mother, not a mistress of tapestries and silken slippers. Today, you are commander, claimant, chosen. You are a problem. History remembers kings who led armies. It forgets the women who dared do the same, unless they bled, or burned, or won spectacularly enough to embarrass the chroniclers. So let's remember them now. There was Eleanor of Aquitaine, who rode in the Second Crusade beside her husband, then divorced him, married another king, bore 10 children, and outlived almost all of them. She ruled from castles and dungeons, surviving betrayals, rebellions, and sons who wanted her silenced. They called her dangerous. They weren't wrong. There was Matilda, the Empress, who should have been Queen of England, but was denied. She raised an army to claim it. She fought through snowstorms, sieges, and slander. They mocked her for being proud, for daring to act like a king. God's punishment on England, they said. But it was her son who became Henry II, and of course, Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, who claimed visions, donned armor, and rallied France when even the Dauphin had lost hope. She could not read, but she knew tactics. She could not marry, but she spoke to kings. And when she burned, it wasn't her body that frightened them. It was her memory. You think of them all as you strap your gauntlets. The steel is not made for your hands. It's made for thicker fingers, broader shoulders. Every piece has been adjusted, hammered thinner, re-riveted. Even your horse had to be specially trained, not to flinch when the men scoff or when they stare. Your enemies don't expect you to ride at the front, but you will. You have to. If you stay behind the lines, they'll say it was the men who won the day. If you fall, they'll say you were foolish. If you win, they'll say it was luck. You've read the script. You've memorized its lies, and so you ride anyway, across muddy fields and snow-choked passes, through forests where your banner catches on low branches, and soldiers whisper that it's a bad omen, over stone bridges where arrows whistle past your face like bees. You ride because there is no other way forward, because ruling from behind a curtain only works if the men in front of it obey. You ride because the crown is not enough. Your armor clinks when you move. It bruises your hips. You sweat underneath it like any man, though no one says it smells noble. When you do, they call you cold, unnatural, hysterical. That last one's their favorite. But you don't care. They call you things. Let them. Let them say you're unnatural. A serpent, a sorceress, a she-wolf. Because in war, those are compliments. What they won't say, at least not loudly, is that you were strategic, that you knew which barons to flatter and which ones to threaten, that you made decisions that saved towns, spared fields, balanced taxes. They'll never put that in the ballads. But the women remember, the camp followers, the washerwomen, the widows, the girls whose brothers fell, but who still watched your banner rise again and again. They tell stories in taverns and kitchens. They remember the queen who rode with a sword instead of a scepter, who wore armor, not just pearls. You ride into battle not for glory, but because the world only listens when the steel is loud enough. Today, your standard does not fall. Today, they see you. Today, you are not just queen. You are legend, women and the unwritten boundaries of medieval justice. You stand before the wooden bench, not as an equal, not as a witness, and certainly not as a judge. You're just a woman, which means the law isn't written for you. It's written around you. The bailiff doesn't look at your face. He reads your name like it's an afterthought. You didn't choose to be here. Maybe your husband died and left debts. Maybe a man struck you in the street and now you have to explain why. Or maybe you were accused. Witchcraft, theft, fornication, gossip. You know, womanly crimes. There's parchment on the table, but none of it bears your handwriting. Because you can't write. Not in Latin, not in law. You are here to be judged, not to understand the rules. The laws of the Middle Ages wore many masks. Royal law, church law, manor law, guild law, custom, taboo, rumor. Each village had its own flavor. Each town its own enforcer. And for women, navigating those rules was like walking through a forest blindfolded, while being told the trees are your fault. Could women own land? Yes, if widowed. Could they inherit property? Technically, yes, unless there was a son. Could they testify in court? Yes, unless the case involved violence, trade, or men. Could they prosecute rape? Yes, if they shouted loud enough during the assault and had male witnesses. The law said yes, but the courtroom said, don't be ridiculous. You remember Margaret? Everyone in town does. She was accused of adultery by her husband, who wanted to marry someone younger. She brought character witnesses, neighbors, even the parish priest. But the judge looked at her dress, her eyes, the way she laughed once at the wrong time. They found her guilty. She was paraded through the square in a smock, barefoot in the snow, not hanged, not branded, just broken. The husband remarried within a week. Or take Johanna, the alewife. Her beer was better than any man's in town, so of course the guilds came after her. Unclean brewing practices, they said. Excessive scolding, they added. Fined once, then twice, then driven from the market. Her recipe? Confiscated. Her barrels? Smashed. Injustice was rarely about punishment. It was about making you disappear. But you learn that the church offers sanctuary if you kneel the right way. You learn which steward is most sympathetic to widows and which one smiles too much. You learn that sometimes the only way to win a case is to lose it slowly enough that your accuser runs out of money. You learn that your tears must be theatrical, your speech rehearsed, your clothing deliberate. Too plain, and you're lying. Too rich, and you're manipulative. Too emotional, and you're hysterical. Too calm, and you're hiding something. You learn to show just enough bruises, and sometimes, just sometimes, you fight back. You hear of women banding together in London courts, hiring scribes, pooling coins, dragging abusive husbands into the open. You hear of a midwife in Rouen who kept such meticulous records that the bishop's court couldn't discredit her. You hear of beguines, neither nuns nor wives, who lived communally and took oaths to no man, legally ambiguous, socially dangerous, spiritually free. These stories travel by whisper, woven into prayers, packed into bread baskets, hidden in lullabies. You watch the scribe jot down a verdict that was decided long before you entered the room. They call it justice, but you know better. You know that the law is a performance, and you are rarely cast in a leading role. Sometimes you play the villain, sometimes the fool. Once, you tried to play the heroine, but the script always ends the same. She was brought before the court, and she was found guilty, lucky, hysterical, pardoned, punished, forgotten. Pick one, but you will not disappear, because you remember, because you speak, because someday someone will write a new law, and this time it will have your name on it. What medieval women were allowed to feel. It begins with a whisper, always a whisper, behind a chapel, in a bathhouse, at the spinning wheel. It might be your sister, your friend, the baker's wife. Someone leans close and says something that shouldn't be said, about her body, about pleasure, about shame, about him, about her. And just like that, you know the truth. You are not the only one who feels what you are not allowed to feel. You live in a world where sin has a scent. It smells like sweat and candle wax, like goat pelts and sanctified incense, like confessions mumbled too fast, like the bed sheets you scrub before anyone sees. Your body is temptation, so the priest says. Not your soul, not your thoughts, your hips, your breasts, the wetness between your legs, the way you laugh too easily, the way your hair is uncovered, or the way it's covered wrong. The message is not subtle. You're Eve, and Eve got everyone punished. In the eyes of the church, your sexuality is a door that opens to hell, unless it's locked behind marriage. And even then, only opened at your husband's command. never your own. You're told that pleasure is suspect, silence is virtuous, desire is a danger you bring upon yourself, and worse, upon others. Want to know what happens if you want too much? They might call you a harlot, a temptress, a succubus, or, if you're lucky, just a silly girl. As if wanting someone is foolish. As if passion is a joke. They built whole sermons out of this fear. There were charts of sins in some abbeys, listing the degrees of carnal fault, who touched what, when, and how, with penalties, with purgatory years, with graphic detail that frankly sounds like the monks were taking very specific notes. And yet, under all that stone and scripture, women still found ways to feel. The midwives knew. They passed around herbs that didn't just ease pain. They stirred heat. They whispered about teas that made you dream, oils that made you brave, candles that mimicked touch. Not all of them worked. Some did. Some did too well. There were love spells written in kitchen soot and menstrual blood. There were songs in Provençal sung by washerwomen and courtesans that made the ears of bishops burn. And there were manuscripts hidden under floorboards that had nothing to do with saints and everything to do with skin. Not every woman was a nun, but even the nuns had their secrets. You heard about Sister Agnes. She wrote poems to a friend that could have boiled the wax of a votive candle. Let my soul taste yours as bread dipped in honey, she wrote. The abbess found the letters and burned them, then wept alone in the garden for days. Or Lady Eloise, whose husband marched off to war, and whose maid was never more than a breath away. The household talked, of course, but no one dared say it outright, not until her cousin tried to blackmail her and fell mysteriously ill 2 days later after biting into a pear. Sin is dangerous, but silence is power. And what of you? You know what they expect. Head bowed, eyes down, no questions, no moans. But you feel, oh, you feel. Maybe it's for the boy who smiles as he carries flour sacks. Maybe it's for the miller's wife with her freckled arms and crooked grin. Maybe it's just a hunger that doesn't need a name. You press it down, but it doesn't leave. It lives in your belly, in your dreams, in the moments you hold your own wrist too tightly and imagine it's someone else's hand. They told you sex was a sin, but no one ever told you what to do with the silence that follows. So you create your own scripture, one written in breath and blush. One that understands that not every touch is wicked, that not every thought must be confessed. You do not need permission to be a body. You do not need forgiveness to be alive. You do not need their silence to know your truth. You are not Eve. You are the one who writes her own garden into being, and in it, nothing is forbidden. When death knocked, women answered first. The smell comes first. It weeps through the shutters, soaked into rags, clinging to the straw on the floor. You know it the way a child knows its mother's voice, instinctively, without needing to be taught. It is not just rot. It is fear made flesh. The scent of the end of the world. It is the plague, and it has come. You were there when the coughing started. It began in the alleyways, among the poor and the strangers. Sailors who looked sick even before they docked. A monk who vomited black blood. The old man on the corner who hadn't moved in 3 days. But no one believed. Not yet. Then came the bells. You know the ones. The slow tolls that mean someone's died. Then more. Then dozens. Then so many they stopped ringing. The church couldn't keep up. The grave diggers collapsed. The priest ran out of Latin and started reading prayers from memory. And when they died, because they did die, it was the women who stayed. You stayed because you were the one who changed the sheets, who mopped the sweat, who wiped the blood, who held the hand that begged not to be left alone. There were no doctors for your kind. Maybe a priest, if he dared come. But mostly, it was you and the dying. You knew what happened to the body next. The swell beneath the arms, the heat, the hallucinations, the boils, purple, black, and cracked like old apples. And the stench. My God, the stench. No painting could ever show it. No text can describe it. But it is the perfume of your nightmares. Still you stayed, not because you were fearless, but because you had nowhere else to go. If you were a mother, you tended your children. If you were a servant, you tended your mistress. If you were a nun, you tended the whole convent. Even if you were widowed, or worse, newly widowed, you couldn't run. The gates were locked. The town shut itself in like a wounded animal gnawing its own leg. The plague spared no one, but women bled first. They say 1/3 of Europe died, but no one counts the names of the women who laid out the corpses, who boiled vinegar and herbs to wipe the walls, who held their breath as they burned the linens, who buried their own infants without tears, because tears were a luxury when everyone around you was dying. They don't write poems for the laundress who cleaned the bishop's corpse, or the midwife who buried 12, or the girl who tended strangers until her lungs filled with pus. But you remember them because you were one of them. And yet, even in this blackest season, some called women the cause. They whispered that the plague was punishment for sin. And who sins most? They asked. Wives who defy husbands, daughters who read Latin, widows who inherit land, healers, midwives always. Somehow, there were rumors of witches, of women who had consorted with demons and brought the plague as revenge. One town burned 6 women for it. Another drowned a girl for having unlucky eyes. In Marseille, they shaved women's heads before driving them into the hills to die alone. Even in death, the blame was gendered. But you know the truth. The truth is that you were the hands that held the dying and the hands that rebuilt the world. When the fever passed, and it did pass, like a storm that forgets what it came for, someone had to gather the pieces. You found bread in empty houses. You took in orphaned children. You cared for a neighbor's goat because no one else remained. The streets were quieter, but the women's work grew louder. You remember the others, the herbalist who risked being called a witch just to make poultices for your sister's skin. The nun who dug graves by hand. The girl who stitched masks from linen soaked in rose water and held your hand as you shook. None of them lived, but you do. You remember them every time your hands shake near a fever, every time the wind carries a cough too far, every time you dream of rats or bells or blackened lips. You remember them because they never got their due. But you were not only a daughter of the plague, you were a survivor. And that, in the Middle Ages, made you something very rare. When words became a woman's weapon, it begins with parchment, crisp, cream-colored, and far too expensive for your fingers. You should not be touching this, not if you're a girl, not unless you're a nun, or a scribe's daughter, or a noblewoman with time to waste. But here you are, quill in hand, heart pounding, trying to turn longing into ink. You're writing a love letter, and it's dangerous. In a world where most women can't sign their names, your script feels like rebellion. Each curl of a letter is a stolen kiss. Each line, a secret shared only between you and a distant heart. You've copied enough Latin prayers to know how to bend grammar like a willow branch. And now, you're using that skill not to praise saints, but to confess desire. You write of eyes like summer ale, of a voice soft as spun wool, of hands you've never held, and lips you're forbidden to name. You seal it in wax. No one must ever know. But you're not the only one. In courtly halls and high-born towers, love becomes a game with rules sharp as daggers. The art of courtly love, they call it. A strange, beautiful dance where men sing the praises of unattainable women, and women, if clever enough, write back. Trobarites, they were called in Occitania, female troubadours, real ones, women who wrote songs of lust and heartbreak, of waiting at windows and riding off to war. Some were noble, some not, but their voices soared across the centuries, like the lady who penned, "I will make a song to tell of my longing, for I love one who does not know." Poetry that whispers louder than sermons. But for most women, love was not poetry. It was contract, dowry, expectation, control. And so, you played where you could, in margins, in embroidery, in lute strings, plucked late at night while the household slept. You learned to speak in riddles. You dropped phrases like rose petals, waiting to see who would pick them up. You sang while spinning. You hummed while baking. You wove your heart into melody because saying it out loud would cost too much. The lute became your confessor. You'd seen the minstrels at feast days, their fingers flying like birds across the strings. And when no one was looking, you practiced a note here, a chord there, until your hands learned a language your mouth could not. And so you sang of longing, of loss, of that strange ache in the chest that had no name in Latin. Sometimes your songs were soft, sometimes bawdy enough to make a monk blush. Sometimes they were remembered, passed from girl to girl, like a secret spell. You weren't supposed to know that power, but oh, you did. Even queens weren't safe from the music of love. Take Eleanor of Aquitaine, twice a queen, mother to kings, and a patron of troubadours. She played the game of courtly love like a general plays chess. Her court in Poitiers became the birthplace of flirtation as art form. Her daughters, Marie of Champagne, among them. Encourage the writing of The Art of Courtly Love, where men were told to adore and women to command. Behind their veils, women ruled with verses, and behind the verses, power crept in. Still, for every love song sung aloud, 100 more died in the throat. The peasant girl who loved the miller's son and married a blacksmith instead. The kitchen maid who heard poetry in the way the stable boy whistled. The nun who wrote verses in the margins of her psalter and prayed for forgiveness after. You were one of them, or maybe all of them. Love, for you, was both fire and frost, a spark that could warm a lifetime, or burn you to ash if discovered. And yet, you kept writing in the folds of a hem, in the strum of a lute, in notes tucked under bread loaves, in songs hummed during washing. Love had no room in law books, but you carved out space for it in everything else. You never expected history to remember you, but somewhere, a scrap of your verse survives, faded, smudged, anonymous, and someone, centuries later, reads it and pauses and wonders who you were, because love in the Middle Ages was a battlefield, and you fought with ink and melody. You lost sometimes, you burned sometimes, but when you sang, the world stopped to listen. When women dared to read, you don't own the book. Of course not. It belongs to the manor, or the abbey, or the merchant's house you serve. Maybe it's kept under lock and key, swaddled in cloth, nestled on a shelf that's always just a little too high. But tonight, the candle is low, the hall is quiet, and your hands tremble as they lift the cover. You are a woman, and you are about to read. They told you it wasn't yours, that words were dangerous, that too much learning turns a woman sour, makes her womb dry up like bad fruit, that clever girls become witches, or worse, unmarriageable. But they also told you Eve ate the apple, and if she hadn't, there'd be no books at all. So maybe you'll take a bite too. In the margins of history's finest tomes, you find the fingerprints of your foremothers, ink-stained, dust-swept, pressed between the pages like dried herbs. Hildegard of Bingen, abbess and mystic, wrote of visions that sang like honeyed thunder. Christine de Pizan, the first professional female writer in Europe, built a whole city of ladies, brick by brick, story by story, to prove that women weren't broken, just misrepresented. And then there's you, sitting barefoot on a cold stone floor, bodice laced tight, trying to sound out Latin syllables with your lips, hoping no one hears. Not all reading was sacred. In bustling towns, chapbooks and romances made the rounds, tattered, thumbs smudged, traded like gossip. You might borrow one from the baker's daughter, or steal glances at a page left on a cart. Some tales were noble: King Arthur, Tristan, and Isolde. Some were pure filth: the knight and the miller's wife, or the goat-faced abbot. And some were written by women for women. There were stories of clever wives tricking cruel husbands, of servant girls who outwitted counts, of queens who ruled kingdoms in disguise. Did the men laugh at them? Yes. Did you read them anyway? Absolutely. Sometimes the book wasn't parchment at all. Sometimes it was a woven tapestry read with fingers, or a hymn learned by heart, or the body itself, a living, breathing text of touch and timing, pregnancy and pain. You read the way your mother read, the signs of weather in the sky, the ache before bleeding, the silence in your master's voice before he grew cruel. This too was literacy, just not the kind they gave prizes for. In the courts of the learned, women who read too much were questioned. Why did Marjorie Kempe cry so loudly during sermons? Why did Joan of Arc insist God spoke to her directly? Why did so many nuns write poetry in the margins of psalters, as if to read was to break something, as if to understand was to unravel the seams of obedience? And so, your bodice grew tighter, not just the fabric, but the rules. The church clutched your thoughts. The guilds defined your worth. And still, you kept reading. You hid pages in hymns. You stitched verses into veils. You traded riddles in market stalls and quotes at wells. You taught your daughters if you dared. Some girls learned the letters of their lovers' names. Some learned the names of herbs and poisons. Some, the names of saints who bled for truth. All were dangerous. Tonight, you light the tallow candle low. The book lies open. Its words don't just rest on your tongue, they burn. You read not for doctrine, not for grammar, but for the simple, radical act of knowing. You are not Eve, nor a nun, nor a queen. You are someone with a mind, and the mind is hungry. They can tie your bodice tighter. They can chain the library door. They can write laws that say, women must be silent. But if even one word makes it true, one verse, one line, one breath, then the fire will spread. And long after your hands are dust, a girl, not yet born, will pick up a book and find you there. Section 20. Legacy in dust and bone. What remains of a woman's life? When no one writes her name, they don't carve your name in marble. They don't gild your tomb. They don't write songs of your softness, or odes to your cleverness, or saints' lives based on the way you stitched up your son's wound with flax thread and prayer. No, your legacy is different. It's in the dust between chapel stones, in the bones dug up by curious scholars 600 years too late, in the lineages no one recorded because you were the mother not the man. You die in childbirth, and your name vanishes with the midwife's whisper. You die of fever, or famine, or fire, and your grave is shared with 5 others, marked only by time. You die as a nun in a silent cloister, buried with hands folded over a rosary, worn smooth by years of worry. Or you die a queen, remembered not for your words, but for the air you bore. You die, and what's left? Sometimes just a comb, a spindle, a shoe with the toes scuffed through. Sometimes a recipe tucked into the seam of a dress, written in a hand no one ever thought to trace. Sometimes just a name in a tax roll, the widow Marjorie, Alice, servant to the baker, but more often than not, nothing. Still, somehow, you survive. Because though the men wrote the laws, the women made the memory. A daughter tells a tale by the fire of her grandmother, who used to cure sick sheep with milkweed. A ballad drifts across the moor, sung in a dialect no priest bothers to understand. A charm for safe childbirth passes from palm to palm, mother to daughter, embroidered into linen, not scripture. This is not history that makes it into books. This is history that clings to fabric and teeth. Centuries later, a team of archaeologists opens a grave. They find a pelvis widened by childbirth, teeth ground down by grain, a silver ring too small for modern fingers, a rosary bead with one side worn smooth from habit, and suddenly she's there, the woman who stood every dawn to bake bread before the bells, the girl who learned to read from the abbess's psalter by moonlight, the healer who knew that fever meant yarrow, that bruises begged comfrey. They don't know her name, but they know her hands, her habits, her hardship. They know her in ways no Lord's tomb ever revealed. The legacy of women in the Middle Ages is not a grand monument. It is layered, threaded, hidden. It's in the cathedral floors they helped sweep clean, in the linens they dyed and sold, in the mead they brewed, and the contracts they signed with a thumbprint instead of a seal. It's in the poetry of nuns, and the margins of ledgers, and the bruises pressed into history's side. And it's in us. We carry their stories, even when we don't know them. Their silence taught us to speak. Their suffering made us sharper. Their love, their labor, their loss, it built everything we stand on. They were never meant to be remembered, but memory, like water, finds a way. It seeps into bones. It sings in lullabies. It swells in every girl who writes her own name in ink and says, I was here, I mattered. And now, because you have read their story, because you've walked the narrow lane of their lives, because your breath has passed over their names even once, they live again, in dust, in bone, in you. And now your eyes are heavy. The candles of the medieval world flicker and fade, one by one. The forge grows cold. The convent bell rings its final note. The last parchment is rolled. The lute silenced. The market shutters drawn. You've walked through centuries on slippered feet, through fields, kitchens, cloisters, courts. You've worn the crown, the veil, the apron, and the armor. You've been silenced, scolded, worshipped, widowed, and written off. But you were always there. Behind every name recorded, 10 were forgotten. Behind every law written, 100 were broken on your back. And yet you endured. You adapted. You survived, not in spite of history, but through it, treading your legacy into linen, song, story, and soil. Tonight, you rest in the quiet knowledge that these women, these midwives, mothers, misfits, queens, and scholars were never truly lost. They lived in every whispered prayer, every lullaby, every ink-stained margin. They live in you now. So close your eyes, hear the hush of chapel walls, the rustle of skirts in a stone corridor, the whisper of a quill against vellum. Feel the warmth of a fire, well tended by calloused hands. Smell bread baking somewhere past memory. Breathe in, exhale the dust of ages, and sleep well, because tonight you remember them, and that is enough. Sweet dreams.